currently a reporter in MMJ at KPIX, CBS News Bay Area, Channel 5 here in San Francisco. I graduated from Syracuse University in 2016. Go Orange! As you can see, us Orange folk are a little obnoxious about our pride in Syracuse, so I always have my reminders up in my van. That's probably the most important thing out of this entire news van, are my Otto the Orange memorabilia right up there, just to remind me always where I came from. So I am a one-man band. Sometimes I do get to report with a photographer, and I enjoy those days because there's pros and cons to working with someone, just like there are pros and cons to working on your own. So most of the time, though, I really am just a one-man band reporter on my own, shooting, writing, editing, and producing all of my own material. So if we want to have some people move over here just so I can have you look at the screen as I kind of walk you through some of the stuff in the van so you can really get a good view of it, that'd be great. So this is my office, effectively. This is where I start my day, and this is where I end my day. I don't even go up to the station to start my day because the Bay Area is such a massive place that it wouldn't make sense to go all the way up to get the car, to then start your day, come back, return the car, and go home. So I take it home, and it is my roving office. So in the van, it has everything that I would need to do my job effectively. And I'm going to go around this way now. So this is where you may want to look at the monitor unless you're right up at the van. So as you can see, in the van, there is an entire desk area back here. It has power. I have one power strip here. I have an inverter right here that allows me to access, one, the power in the van, but two, the internet, which is brought on by a little thing right up here. This one's called PepWave, but this gives my truck internet capability from almost anywhere. Obviously, if you can't get cell service, you're probably not going to get internet service either, but it's actually pretty good. This is what allows me to communicate with the station. This is what allows me to feed my stories back from wherever I am. It just helps me. I couldn't do the job without this, basically. So inside the van, I've got a chair at this desk, which is not on wheels. I was asked that question earlier. So it doesn't, roam around when I'm driving. And I have a bungee cord here that really, I wrap it around the chair so there's not a hazard of a chair flying around while I drive. Right here is where I do the majority of my work. If I can go inside of a building to edit, sometimes I will because it's a little more comfortable than sitting here in the back of a van. But again, I've got everything I need. Right here is the computer that I use. I've got my batteries for my camera that are charging here always when I'm driving, just because it's one of the most important things as a one-man band to always be charging your equipment because you never know when you're going to need it. And then, various devices can plug in here. I keep my tripod in a bag right here on the ground. So everything is within reach for me to just take it out and start my reporting. Sometimes it has to happen right next to the van. Other times I can walk with my equipment as well. I had to move one thing for the purposes of the demonstration, and I'll grab it back here. I hang it next to my Otto the Orange because that's the most logical place where there was a hanger. But something as an MMJ too, you always need to have various clothes with you. So I've got 2 blazers, always an extra shirt in the van, just in case you need it for something. Some stories, it's okay to dress a little more casually. Some stories, you're going to want to put on the blazer as well. So I've got that always here as well. And in the front of the car, I'm not sure if we'll be able to get all the way up in there, but I have a couple of ties that are always ready to go, just in case you need those as well. And I'll shut that door back here. And so this car has been all over Northern California. I've taken it to Tahoe. Some days I find myself in Gilroy in the South Bay. Some days I find myself in Napa in the North Bay. I've gone to Sacramento for various stories. I've been driving this van for about a year and a half. I think I've put about 20,000 miles on it. So it's a lot of driving, especially in the Bay Area TV market. But it's really pretty cool to be able to do it, and having the capabilities to work out of this, it's phenomenal. And that's something that doesn't happen in the smaller markets in the start. When I started my career as an MMJ, 7.5, somewhere around there, I guess 7.5 years ago, I was in Tucson, Arizona, and it was a phenomenal station, and a K-Gun 9. And there was several of us MMJs who we had to just share cars, and we were sharing Ford Explorers or Ford Escapes or various kinds of cars that were not outfitted at all like this, but that's okay. That's how it goes in a lot of places when you're starting. This is, Market 6 MMJ setup. And not everybody even has a total setup like this. I'm very fortunate to be able to have this kind of a setup. For those of you who are still in school, for those of you who are looking to get into this, you may get to this spot one day, but be ready to do a lot of your MMJ work, editing out of your car, dinosaured up like this in the front seat with one leg up, holding your computer up on your lap. Be ready to put the story together from a Starbucks. Be ready to put the story together from a hotel lobby. I've sat on the ground outside of businesses before on the sidewalk putting together stories in Tucson, in Las Vegas, all over the place. But it's part of the fun too. So that's basically, with the car itself, mostly it. I don't know if we can get all the way in here, but we'll see if I can show what we got. So up here, I've got a couple of ties, got my makeup for when I need it, badge, got my parking pass, which is really important as well. That's up there. And then just a couple of other things tucked away inside the van as well. Like things you can't see are my snacks, my waters, your little go bag things that you always should have as a one-man band. Because again, the nature of the beast as a one-man band, or I should say a one-person crew, sometimes you are on your own for hours and hours and hours upon end, and you do need food, and you don't always have time to run to, a place for a sandwich or anything like that. So I at least always try to keep my van stocked with some like granola bars, Nature Valley, things like that. I have a lunchbox that I bring as well that I didn't bring up today, and waters all the time. So that's really important. If you are gonna jump into a career of doing this, just always remember to keep water and food in your van, because it really is not fun when you don't have that and you are working and turning 3 stories in a day and you don't have time to stop and breathe, and then you get a headache, and it's not fun. And I've learned that lesson many times, so I always try to keep water in the van. So I think that's all I was trying to go with here. Let's see. Yeah. Any questions? Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, right here.
One question is maybe a little bit kind of a sidelining thing. So
sure.
Short answer on it. If you see, and a lot of people that I've talked to that are in the industry that I've heard from have reported a lot of theft and robbery, and so there's a certain amount of anxiousness about that at the moment. Have you run into that? What are your thoughts? How do you protect yourself? I'm
glad you brought that up. That reminded me of the next thing I actually wanted to talk about. So you'll notice the van is not marked. There's nothing on this van that says KPIX. Nothing that says media, nothing that says CBS. There's no decal or anything like that, and that's intentional because there is no need to draw extra attention to yourself. We do live in a day and age, especially here in San Francisco, where there is some stress with people who work in the media. There are people who have been robbed. I think it's happened at almost every station by now. Over the past 10 years, it really started to happen here in San Francisco. So yes, while I am a one-man band, I know my station, I believe every station in the Bay Area, believe that's the case, does contract security if you want it. And there are some days where I do feel like I'd like to work with somebody who is having my back and just that extra set of eyes on whatever you're doing. And I think safety is one of the most important things wherever you decide to report, wherever you're doing your job. Here in the Bay Area especially, it's paramount, and it can be tricky as a one-man band, and management is typically very well aware of that. And they understand that sometimes you are on your own, and it doesn't feel right. So you leave. It's not nothing ever. If I can impart wisdom to up-and-coming journalists, there's no story, no shot, no interview, nothing ever that is worth your safety. Safety is the most important thing, no matter what. So, yep.
Question: insurance to protect your gear and so forth when you're shooting.
That's a great question. I wish I had a good answer for it. I don't know it off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure the station does have insurance on at least the gear and everything like that. So, yep.
All right, Mr. Max, does the company provide security for you guys?
Yeah. We work with various, I don't know if it's various anymore, but we have a security provider that we work with.
Retired police officers?
Typically, they're retired law enforcement, some form of law enforcement. Yeah.
Perfect.
Go ahead, right here.
Do you get assigned stories, or do you have to come up with pitches every day?
Every single day you have to come up with pitches. There's always things in the can. People are always generating story ideas, but every day you have to make sure you come to the table with well-vetted, well-thought-out pitches. Key word there is pitches, not just one, multiple pitches. And that's something that is, a challenge, of course, at times, but also as an MMJ, when you do have total control over your story, at least in the production side of your story, it makes it exciting too, because you can really see out that vision from the point where you first had that thought of the story idea. You can see it to completion because you're the one behind the camera, you're the one editing, you're the one asking the questions, and you're the one putting it all together. And that's something that I really do love about being an MMJ, is having that creative control from start to finish. Right here.
I got here a little late, so I don't know if you answered
No worries.
this, but do you actually, you don't have like the traditional news vans with the dish, and how do you transmit your stories?
Yep, so in this one I have a little internet capability up here on the top of the car. I don't know if you can see it from here, but it's there. And we can feed everything back through our servers that we can access out in the field as long as we're on the internet. I don't have a live view backpack in this car because I do not do live shots on my own. So if I were to meet up with a photographer for a live shot, which we do a lot, not every day anymore, but we do a lot. If for some reason I was having connectivity issues and couldn't transmit all my material back, we can feed it through their material. They typically have a live view backpack, or some of them still do drive live trucks where we can do it that way as well. So, right here.
You have 180 minutes on an SD card.
Yep.
Is that 4K and a terabyte?
No, let's see, I've got it right here. This is my camera, by the way, little thing. It's not a huge news camera that you might think of. Let's pull it out. I want to actually give you the answer. It's not a terabyte. I think it's 256 gigabyte. No, it might even only be 64. That's 64. Yeah, so it might be 150 minutes, not 180, but got a lot of them going.
Shooting 4K?
I don't believe I'm shooting 4K, but I don't actually know that for 100%. So this camera, it is, yeah, Devin Feely, one of the best photographer MMJs in the business right there. He has these answers. HD for sure. Camera can do 4K. It says 4K on there, but I don't think we are doing anything with 4K. Had a question there in the back. Yeah, go ahead.
Speaking of pitches and safety, who's covering? I don't see a lot of Northern California coverage, especially Eureka and Humboldt and the industry and that sort of thing. So this would be perfect for more rural areas.
It definitely would. For us, so Humboldt, Eureka, Redding, that is a different television market. So we won't be out there unless there's a really big news event that would warrant the Bay Area to come up. So,
To the industry, though, you got
the what?
the industry,
Oh, sure. I think this would be great for the industry.
the Humboldt industry, for the marijuana industry.
Oh, sure.
And I'm just curious because it's shifting so much that we're not seeing that so much in the news, especially the economics of it.
That's a great question. I wish I had the full answer for it. It could be. If I could get up there, if there's a good story to come up there and I can sell my managers on it, absolutely. I'm always looking for good story ideas. So
But you got a safety issue, but you could drive around Salmon Creek and stuff.
that's true. All right.
This dude over here has been has had it forever.
Which one? You're right here. Okay, go ahead.
I guess my main question is, like, Tilda, how do you get to like this job? Because it's not really, I've never really heard of like this pathway as like,
Okay.
you mentioned like when you're starting out, you would be like editing at like cafes and things like that, but like, how does one become like independent MMJ versus like being worked in the studio?
So there are several different paths you take in this industry to find your way. I can talk about the on-air paths, and I can talk about the off-air paths. On-air is obviously where I have my expertise. So when I went to school, and this is a great tie that we're standing here at SF State too, So I didn't go to SF State, I went to Syracuse University, and similar facilities where you have the option and ability to really get your hands and feet wet with this industry. And I hope here at SF State, I'm sure they probably are, it's a great communications program, are having you go out and teaching you about the camera and teaching you what it is like to actually be in this industry. The days of entering this industry with the expectation that you're going to be in a 2-person, 3-person crew are gone. That's just not how this works anymore. Anybody who starts out in this industry, not going to say anybody, but almost anybody that starts out in this industry will start out as a 1-person band, MMJ. And a lot of the learning comes through college, a lot of the learning comes through internships, and a lot of the learning, probably the most learning, comes in that first week on the job. Honestly, the first week on the job, I thought I knew everything. I went to a great journalism school. I knew how to shoot. I knew how to ask questions. I knew how to edit. I knew how to be on TV and present a story. And that first week, I learned more than I did in 4 years at a phenomenal journalism school in America. I had my computer crash. I didn't know how to use the editing system that my station provided me. The camera was different than the one that I shot on in college. The entire thing was overwhelming. So it is overwhelming, but you learn once you get there. And I think when you are starting out in this industry, when you're hired in that first job, you're not looking to get to San Francisco as your #1 job because you're not ready for it. You're not looking to get to Las Vegas, which was my second job, for your first job. You're looking to start out in a smaller place. And I believe there are 210 television markets in America. For your first job, you're probably looking in those higher numbers, not meaning 1 through 10, but the higher meaning 70 to 210. Because that's where you're going to get your start. That's where you're going to learn and make the mistakes. That's where you're going to learn and understand how to use the equipment and how to be a 1-person band and make your way up the ranks, contract after contract after contract. So hopefully that answers some of your question. I should say one more thing, and I know there's that question in the back. I'll get to you next. When it comes to actually landing that first job, it's a lot of just throwing your resume and demo reel at the wall and seeing what sticks. When I looked for my first job, I really wanted to go to Tucson because it was closer to home, but I knew that that was not necessarily at all going to be where I land. I think I sent my resume and demo reel out probably 45 to 50 news directors in America, just constantly looking at a station, seeing what they do, identifying if it was a place that I thought could be an interesting place to live and work for a couple of years, and seeing if anything stuck. And I don't think I heard back. I probably heard back, honestly, from like 6, maybe 7 of the 45, 50 that I pitched to unannounced. And the ones that I heard back from are ones I followed up 3 times with. So it's a hard sell when you're coming out of school because you don't have that experience. But good news management understands that. And they'll see that, okay, maybe he doesn't know quite how to do it yet, but that makes sense because he's coming from college. But there's promise here. And he's going to be able to learn. She's going to be able to learn what we do here. And once you get going, you can't look back. You in the back. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, thanks. What do you think of these guys that use drones? And do you use one?
These guys that use drones got me to use a drone. 2 of them are standing right over here.
I realize that.
Yeah.
Do you use one?
I do. Actually, it was Kit and Devin, if you saw their presentation. They really encouraged me to get on the drone team at Channel 5. And it's definitely a rigorous process going through all the learning. At least 40 hours. It felt like I was back in school going through these modules and studying, because in being a day-to-day reporter, there's not a lot of studying you necessarily get to do for something. You study up ahead of a shoot, but studying like that was great. I love being able to use a drone. It has just been able to be a wonderful complement to my reporting. It allows me to see things from a different angle, a different lens, and put stories together in a new way. But in your first job, that's the last thing you want to be thinking about. I hate to say that, but you want to really nail down the basics in your first job, and really in your second job, you want to continue to build upon that foundation you built in the first job. And
As a side note, I hire out my scooter on weekends if you need any scooters.
thank you. Always looking for creative shots too. So
It's a dolly.
I know that's the first thing I thought of. So got one right here, and then we'll go to you, sir.
Yeah, so you mentioned a little while ago 2 to 3 stories a day. First of all, so are those typically all packages, or are some of them both slots?
Just depends. Every market I've worked in has had different expectations for different days and different stories. There have been days where, I'll use my time in Las Vegas as an example. I worked night side, and there were days, and in Vegas I did not always shoot my own stuff, so this was a little different. I'd get in at 2:30. We had a 3, 5, 6, 7, 10, and 11 o'clock newscast in Vegas. And there were days when I'd get in at 2:30, there was a breaker. I'd be live at 3, 3:30, 5, or 3 and 3:30, sometimes just live with nothing except just straight lives, which is just there, no video to cover you up, no soundbite, nothing is pre-produced. 3 and 3:30 straight lives. 5 o'clock package, which is a fully produced story. 6 o'clock, similar package. 7 o'clock VOSOT. VOSOT is where you have video that you're talking over, but it's not totally pre-produced, where you toss to a soundbite. And then packages at 10 and 11. So that was crazy. Typically, you don't have stuff like that. Here in this market, it's less so like that. There are days where you're putting together 2 packages in a day, but it's typically the same subject matter, just a different angle on that story. So, but in your first market, it's going to be different because you are often working on teams of 3 reporters, 4 reporters, where you have to cover a massive coverage area, and there are so many different stories going on where you will probably be working on one story for the 5 and a different story for the 6. And that's hard to do, especially as a one-man band. So you learn your skill set really quickly, and you understand what's important to do on a day in and day out basis, and when you don't have time to get fancy with anything. So go ahead, SF State right here.
I'm kind of cynical, but it seems to me like maybe they've created this classification as a way, a cost-cutting thing. I assume you don't make as much as other reporters do. I mean, not just you and personally, but I mean.
You know, I think that's a case-by-case basis. This is the direction the industry has gone in, but it's also been around. The MMJ, I think, has been around for much longer than people may realize. I know Devin and Kit over here, they've been shooting for longer than I've been in this industry. I'm not going to put them on the spot, but they've been shooting for a long time. I knew people in their first markets who they've retired, and they MMJ'd 30 years ago, if I get that correct. And they were doing this when they had tape to tape and had to cut, literally cut everything that they did. So yes, there are drawbacks to it that I think your cynicism is somewhat on point with, but the beast has to go on, and there are plenty of us who still love to do it and see the understanding and the importance of it, and we're willing to do it.
I mean, I understand you love to do it, but I mean, just from a union perspective, I mean, I thought there was some resistance to this initially in some places, just because, you know, they pay you a lower scale. I mean, I remember when I actually started out that they had 3 people. There was actually one person did the sound. I mean, it seemed like,
Yeah.
But, well, that's why, I mean, I just feel like, I hope, you know, I hope that's not like a permanent slot that you can't advance out of.
It just depends on where you are.
To answer that question a little bit, because we all work at Channel 5, Kit until recently, just a couple months ago. So generally speaking, there is no distinction that's made in pay for an MMJ versus a reporter. The cost savings that they're going to, TV stations will make a number of arguments about why they're sort of moving to this model. They'll say that it makes them more nimble, that, you know, at the end of the day, one of the primary motivations, and we'd be disingenuous if we didn't acknowledge this, is the fact that it saves you money. But the cost savings is not necessarily that you bring the MMJ in at a lower pay scale, it's that you need fewer photographers. So for example, Max, myself, and Kit had the same general geographical coverage area, which was kind of the peninsula and Santa Clara County, under a model in which everyone is paired with a photographer. Then there's 6 people that you're paying.
Yeah.
But generally speaking, MMJs will either shoot a look live and will not be live, or at the very end of their day, they'll kind of pick a story, and that person will be live. And so there's fewer photographers that are needed because there's not a one-to-one matching.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, so it is about saving money, but the saving of the money generally comes from not having to have a photographer that's dedicated to every single reporter that you have on staff.
Do they get more independent like that?
We have more independence, we'll let Max get back to it. I think one of the things that we love, because we actually like both sides of the craft, being a reporter and also being a visual storyteller, a photographer, and an editor, it does give us a sense of creative control. The downside is there are certain days and certain stories that maybe you just want to let somebody else handle that, or you miss the synergy of being able to bounce ideas off another human, saying, well, I was thinking about this, and they said, well, what about that?
Right.
You know, that's what you sort of miss, because you're generally not working in tandem with someone else whose sole focus is, what are the pictures, how am I going to edit them together?
And on top of that, sometimes I'm a believer of it's great to have a second set of eyes and a second set of ears and a second brain where you go. Oftentimes when I have worked with photographers, I'd always ask at the end of every interview if they have any questions. And most of the time, their question, because they're not lost in the weeds of the interview, their question is the best one that was asked. Because as the reporter, you're standing there thinking about, how am I going to tell this story? What do I need to ask? What am I hoping they're going to say? What do I think they're going to say? But the photographer's just, so, tell me about this. It's often the best question, the best soundbite that you'll use. So it's helpful to have that. And I see at least one photographer in here who I know who asks some good questions. I've been at press conferences with him. Kit, I'll get to you in 1 second, but that guy's had his hand up in the back.
I wanted to ask you about the burnout rate. How burnt out do you get with constantly looking for stories, thinking, just kind of related to what you were just saying, where you kind of get lost in the story?
It's a great question. I think it's going to be different for every individual. I have had my points where I have questioned, what am I doing with my life? As you would do in, no, I'm serious. And if you don't ask yourself that question in any career that you're doing, you're not giving it everything. You want to make sure you're giving everything you got on a day-to-day basis. And, you know, I think some people who do get burnt out, I have plenty of friends and colleagues who have left the industry, some after 2 years, some after 10, some after longer. Some of the people who did leave were the most passionate people. And it's because they expected to love every single aspect of the job every day, no matter what. That's just not realistic. I love this job, but there are days when I scratch my head and can't stand a day. And that's okay. You move on to the next one. And I think that having that understanding that you don't have to love every single component of this job day in and day out really helps with the idea of not getting burnt out. But of course, there's been times when I've felt exhausted, where I really needed that vacation that I was going on. But one of the things that really I think also helps with the burnout is every few weeks you get a story that touches your heart, or you do a story that changes something in the world, or a story that just you were really, really proud of. And knowing that that's just around the corner again, when you least expect it, for me, that makes it all worth it. And those periods where I get a little tired and frustrated, all of a sudden I'll put together a story, or I'll meet somebody on a story that just makes me remember why I love doing this. So, Kit, go ahead. What did you have to add?
Have you given much thought to the reporter who was killed in Orlando? He
Yeah.
was sitting in a vehicle just like this 2 weeks ago, and he was shot and killed.
Yeah.
And we, reporters, MMJs, sit in vehicles like this for hours on end. How has his death weighed on your mind?
It's been a tough one to swallow. You know, you talk about it with a lot of people in and out of the industry. There's things you can and can't do, unfortunately, in a situation like that. And it's still something you think about every day. And unfortunately, it's not the first time it's happened either. For me, it makes me just really put an extra emphasis on the idea of always, one, keeping your eyes up and aware of wherever you are, no matter where you are, even in a place that is safe. You never know, something can happen. And two, on the importance of something that I brought up earlier today about nothing ever is worth your safety and worth your life. No story, no interview, nothing is ever worth that. And I don't know all of the internal decisions that were made there, so I don't want to put anything out there that would put anyone at fault, anyone to blame, because it might have just been this horrific tragedy that just happened by chance. But it does make you think, always be careful and just keep safety at the forefront of your head no matter where you are. And if you don't feel safe in a place, if you're sitting in a neighborhood and the police aren't there and you don't feel like you're okay being there, don't. Leave. Just leave. And again, I don't know the specifics of that situation. I don't know what those internal discussions were like, but it has made me sometimes in the past just week and a half think about safety in life and also the importance of what we do. Because journalists, I don't think a lot of people give credit to the risks that a lot of journalists take on a day-to-day basis to tell stories and bring you the local news and the national news and everything. Because there are so many variables that we don't think about that go into this job. And that's one of them. And sometimes you can't avoid that. I don't know what else to really say. It's a great question. Anybody else? Right here in the front.
I know you've talked a lot about, first market things. I'm currently in MMJ in my first market. Actually was a production assistant at KPIX
Cool.
right before. And so when you're in that first market as an MMJ, what are some of those skills or things that you should really focus on developing or honing in on as you try to make that jump to the second market?
I think one of the most important things we'll start with the reporting side of it without even picking up a camera. When you're doing an interview, one of the most important things is to listen. Not to yourself, but to the subject you're actually interviewing. Because that's going to make your life so much easier when you actually want to put this story together, because you know what they were talking about, and you're not wasting time trying to re-listen to an interview in the car that could have been too long in the first place, because time management is everything. And you're also going to tell a better story if you listened the first time. But it's not something you necessarily actively think about as you're going out and reporting a story. With that, you'll go into the car and you'll streamline your process of editing and writing a story because you know exactly what they said, or the gist of what they said, and you don't have to scrub through 20 minutes of an interview to find out the soundbite I want is at 13 minutes and 47 seconds. I think that's one of the most important things that'll help your life as an MMJ in your first market making the jump. The other thing is the basics of shooting. Make sure you always get your wide, medium, and tight and super tight shots. Think about that. Think about how are you going to edit this piece while you're shooting this piece. So you're not just coming back with 45 shots of random things that were related to the story, but you have no idea how you're going to put it together. When I'm a great photographer, my first market taught me that. Shoot to edit. As you're shooting, you just look and say, how can I sequence these shots as I'm putting them together to tell a succinct story? One of my coworkers, Da Lin, phenomenal reporter here, I think he told me one day, sometimes you don't have all the, he's been at MMJ for a long time, something to the tune of, there are days when you can get really, really creative and tell a beautiful, beautiful story, but there are also days where you need to have 10 shots that are going to tell you a 1 and 20-second story. And you better make sure those 10 shots you have can tell that story. And that's your sequences of wide, medium, tight, super tight, get another angle. So between just the basics of shooting and editing with just those simple things of sequencing and then listening during your interviews, I think those are probably the two of the most important things as an MMJ. The on-air performance, that comes with practice and time and repetition, repetition, repetition. But you're going to be better on air if you know your story in and out. So hopefully that helps.
Definitely help. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Madden, I want to go back to what you're saying about the shooting.
Okay.
Well, I learned that is make sure your B-roll counts when you're out there shooting.
Yeah, that's
Make sure that, but not for me, like for anybody, like make sure that when you're doing a story, your B-roll matches.
Yeah.
Your A-roll.
Exactly, and that's tied into the writing and editing and shooting process. It's all tied together. You always want to write to your video, and writing to your video doesn't mean narrating your video. Narrating your, like if the shot is Max opens the door, and that's what I got a shot of. I don't need to write in my story to match the video. As Max opens the door, you can see that I'm opening a door. Right. What can I tell you that matches the video that you can't see? And well, there's plenty of things. Depends on what the story is about. Maybe I'm opening the door to the car that meant the most to me in the world, like this beautiful Nissan NV200 that looks like a plumber's van. You could write something, so you shoot with intention. So you're shooting this video, it's a sequence of Max opening the door. And instead of, this is how you make it count. You shoot that, and there's a purpose behind the shot. You know your story. Max is opening this door for what reason? Because he loves this car. So Max gets into the car that he spends way too many hours of his day in. There you go. So that's when you make your shooting count. You want to shoot, I like to overshoot things that I go to because it gives you more options. But before you get that opportunity to overshoot something, you got to make sure you have your basics, so shoot them with intention before you get too creative and too crazy.
But yes, it was also taught, we were also taught that you could never have too much B-roll.
Yeah, I think to a point, but as an MMJ, time management is everything.
You're right.
And once you know what you got and you know you have enough, get out. No need to linger, no need to keep going because you're only making it harder for yourself at the end of the day when you're trying to slam that package together. Okay. Hopefully you don't want to slam that package together.
Okay, got it.
You'd rather be able to just walk away knowing you've got a little extra time and you're always ahead of each deadline you have. That's one of the most important things as a one-man band is to just, if your deadline, say your feed deadline is 4:40, and there are probably technical directors and producers in here who would not like to hear me say 4:40 for a 5 o'clock live shot. Probably 4:30 is where you want to be. Set your deadline 5 to 10 minutes ahead of your actual deadlines because stuff goes wrong. And at the end of the day, if you don't make your slot, you don't want to have that conversation. It's not a conversation you want to have. So.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, I mean to, sorry.
You're good.
Hopefully I asked a great question.
You are. You're asking great questions.
And added a great point.
Yeah, no, you're doing great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the questions. Thank you.
To my next question.
Go
Have
ahead.
you ever missed a deadline?
I have never missed a deadline by something that wasn't out of my control, if that makes sense. I have missed, I can remember 3 instances in my career where I missed deadlines. And they were not fun experiences. They were frustrating. I was banging on the steering wheel of my car, chewing myself out for something that wasn't even my fault. But if you are going to miss a deadline, make sure it's not your fault. Make sure it's not your fault. Every station, that's the most important thing of putting a newscast together is a deadline. You know, if your story is slated to air at 5 o'clock and 23 seconds, doesn't matter if you got your story in at 5 o'clock and 26 seconds because you missed your deadline. So, go ahead in the back right there.
Talking about time management.
Yeah.
What, in your opinion, makes a great thought, and what are your techniques to getting that great thought?
What makes a great SOT? So for those who don't know, a SOT is a soundbite, sound on tape. That's the name of it. It really just depends on the story that makes a great soundbite. I personally don't think there should be a time limit on a soundbite. There are some soundbites that are incredibly powerful that are 4 seconds. There are some soundbites that are incredibly powerful and important or informative that are 26 seconds. You don't want 26-second soundbites in a story constantly that's 1 minute and 15 seconds or even a 2-minute piece. But if there's a good reason to put that soundbite in there that's truly important to the story, you do it. Doesn't matter if it feels long to you or seems like, well, somebody said you never put a soundbite more than 15 seconds. I think the most important thing is just having a reason for everything you do in that story. Everything you do should have intention. Every frame of video, every soundbite, every track, every pause, every piece of natural sound you put in there should be done with intention and for a reason. So hopefully that answered part of your question. The second part of your question, how strategies to get a good soundbite? One of them is to listen to the interview. Second is to make sure you know the story that you're doing. So do your research on a story, but obviously if there's something that's happening now, you're at the scene of a fire or something like that, go back to the basics. Hey man, what's going on? Honestly, what's going on? That's one of the best questions you could ever ask on a dynamic scene like that. What'd you see? What'd you hear? Tell me more about that. Just be curious. Naturally be curious. As a journalist, you want to be curious about everything you do. So be curious. And the other thing with getting the good soundbite, to me, as awkward as it is, did you feel that right there?
Yeah, after a nice break.
Did you feel that? People hate silence. It's awkward. Psychologically, it's just something that's uncomfortable. So edge them out in silence. Because oftentimes people come into interviews with these ideas of what they really, really want to say, and it's this perfectly manicured thing that they want to tell you. But it doesn't cut to the core of the story, of the subject, of the person even. So elicit that response, because that's when the best stuff comes out. Go ahead right here. Yep, and then we'll come over here.
Max, what's the best story that you've ever shot that you really felt like I did that? That was cool.
That's a great question. It's the hardest question people ask whenever I speak to people. I'm going to say there's two that come to mind right now, and the answer probably would change if you asked me tomorrow. There's one I did on a barber he had been a barber in the Sunset District of San Francisco his whole life, had this tiny little old-fashioned barber shop, and it was just a personal story. And I felt like it was one of the stories where I just nailed it, honestly. I had him mic'd up throughout the entire story, and I was just a fly on the wall the whole time, and just sat through 3 different people that he cut hair on, and just actually spent the time with him to feel him and his emotion and his feelings of his final cuts that he was doing. That's one. And we put together a total feature piece. Not at all hard news story by any stretch of it, but it was just a good story. And I think when I put that edit together, there was not a frame in that I felt like could have been different. At least when I sent it in. When I Monday morning quarterback it and go back and, I could change 16 things. But second one, this was more of an interesting drought story. This is the one I went up to Tahoe for recently. It was, I probably should go back now that we've had all this crazy weather, but it was about the forecast of the snowpack and the impact of a good winter on our drought here. And in that story, I harnessed the drone. I was able to harness a good human character and combine it all with beautiful imagery and hopefully strong writing as well. So those are probably the 2 best examples I have for putting it all together. Because as an MMJ journalist, but really MMJ too, your job isn't to just shoot pretty pictures. Your job isn't just to do a compelling interview or just write a cool story. Your job is to weave together and marry beautiful imagery with compelling characters and a strong story. And the best story ties all of those things together. And as an MMJ, you have the control over all of those things.
Did you put it in for an Emmy?
I did.
Did you win?
We'll find out in a couple months. 10? Okay. Perfect. Cool.
How
Yep.
do you find stories to pitch for?
That's one of the questions that's always changing. You always are talking to people out in the community. You are scouring various newsletters. Every reporter's got a different take on this too, and everybody's got different strategies. And I'm always curious to ask other reporters this question, because sometimes you get a little bit of it, you get in a rut sometimes. You don't have those contacts who are pitching you on stories.
How you differ from something mundane to something that could be a good story?
You just have to make sure you vet what you're looking into. Sometimes you find a story that seems a little mundane, but you dig a little deeper onto it and you find out, oh, well, there is a really interesting person behind this story. Or there's a bigger deal issue that maybe this is just a small city council issue that I discovered on an agenda for next week. But if I actually look into that issue, whoa, there's a bunch of people.
So when you're done here, there's going to be food up on the 3rd floor. So lunch will be on the 3rd floor. So
Great.
That should motivate you.
Absolutely. I'll take just a couple more, so I'll finish answering yours and then like 3 more, and then we'll get out of here. Yeah, so you just have to look into story ideas. Don't take things at face value. Just really look into it and do your own research, and you'll often find some amazing people for the story. Okay, we'll take 3 more right here.
Do you guys work as freelance contractors, or are you actual station employees?
Contracted station employees. There are some people who work freelance in the industry, but pretty much most of us these days, I feel like, are contracted. So, not every station, but I've never not been contracted. So.
Do you mean personal service contract or independent contractor?
For the individual station, it's a contract with the station. Okay. Yeah, with the company. Yeah. Anybody else? All right. Cool. Well, I really appreciate you guys asking such amazing questions and listening to me talk for a little bit. If you have any questions, don't ever hesitate to reach out. And thank you.